Hey everybody, I'm Nicole.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Sarah, and together we're the co-founders of Whale Tales, a living library of cetacean stories.
And today we have another exciting guest. Yay, guests!
Woo! Yay! So sit back and enjoy as we dive right in.
Today, we're very excited to welcome our guest, Elizabeth Zwamborn.
Yeah! Elizabeth is a marine mammal scientist who studies the group life of cetaceans, including how they make decisions together and navigate life within complex social groups. Most of her research happens around Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, where she studies the local long-finned pilot whale population, collaborating closely with nearby coastal communities to share knowledge and support marine conservation. Woohoo. Lately, her research has also started to look at how these pilot whales have been responding to a rapidly changing ocean.
We talked to Elizabeth about her work on pilot whales and bottlenose whales, plus what's going on over there in the Atlantic Canada region. Because, hey, for those of you not from Canada, our country is really, really big. In fact, there is a song about it. But we also talked to Elizabeth about her journey through higher education and cetacean research and at least 10 other things. We could have talked to Elizabeth for at least 5 days solid, but unfortunately for you, our listeners, we all need to sleep.
Yeah.
And it was getting quite late.
Yes. But it was a great conversation.
It was so good. Yeah. So let's get to it. Now we are here with Elizabeth Zwamborn, who is been sending us some amazing stories from and helping us build our library of cetaceans for a long time now. We're really excited to finally have her on the pod to talk to us about all sorts of exciting things. So, Elizabeth, if you want to start with a quick introduction, and then we'll kind of get into all your exciting things.
Sure, absolutely. So I am a longtime whale lover, cetacean lover, we'll say. I started off at a very young age and decided that I wanted to be a marine biologist, as many people do when they're young. And I was one of the ones that actually decided, okay, I would pursue this. And so right now I am currently teaching undergraduate studies and doing research, and kind of in that ideal spot that I'd hope I would be. But, you never know whether you get a chance to teach and do research. It's really hard. And teaching and research can happen in unconventional ways. You can work with a nonprofit. You can work at a museum. You can be educator. But I really love teaching and the undergraduate students and helping them kind of realize their passions and also gain an understanding of why marine mammals are so important.
Yay.
Amazing.
So first of all, what do you teach the undergrads?
So I'm the ecology and zoologies prof. So I don't teach like basic first year biology, but in second year they get me for general ecology.
Nice.
A lot of students that come into biology or the sciences, they start off thinking, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a nurse, or I'm going to go into something along those lines, maybe medical research. And a lot of them, especially when they're in an urban environment, haven't thought about the possibilities beyond that. They might think, oh, I'm going to be a vet because I love animals. I love working with animals. And so ecology opens up some of their minds to thinking, oh, there's other ways to do that. There's other ways to help and contribute. And yes, some people are, that definitely doctor is for them and they go through and they're passionate about that. My hope is with doctors that then realize that learning about the environment, caring about the environment is important for them as well. So it's not an island. It's not something that some people should care about and others don't. And then those who maybe didn't know about their passion for ecology, that's the beginning of this journey. And then I teach vertebrate zoology, I teach invertebrate zoology, I teach conservation biology, which is like applied ecology. So now that we know the theory, what do we do? How do we do restoration? And I also teach a marine mammals course, which is really fun. Of course, that's my passion.
Can you just do a quick course for us
right now?
I'm
like,
let's go back.
Want to go back to school.
I actually just started the marine mammals class today. And so I have 9 students who are really keen to learn about space.
Oh, nice.
That's so awesome.
All my favorite undergrad
You're
classes.
hitting all the hot spots. Well, because I was going to say, there was a 102 ecology that I think, and then a second year as well. But I took 102 and it was like, I found my people, like general biology is general biology. And then I got into ecology and I was like, oh, yes, this is what people talk about when they talk about university and finding yourself, even though I already knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
This was like, this is what makes sense to me.
So. I've also, because I was one of those people like you, Elizabeth, who like as a 4-year-old was like, I'm going to be a marine biologist. And then I was followed through. I'd never thought about ecology the way that you just described it for folks who may have had a much more kind of like, I don't want to say Western science because it's not like marine biology isn't Western science, but like had a very focused and narrow view of what sciences were prior to getting to university, and what kind of like, especially maybe what occupations existed within sciences before getting to university. I love what you said about just kind of like opening people's experiences that way.
Well, one of the first things we do, we talked about yesterday was the first class, is one of the first things I do is introduce what ecology is. And I explain how ecology isn't necessarily environmentalism. Like everybody thinks who's not from that world that automatically, if you're an ecologist, you're going to be environmentalist. And we talk about the difference between being an activist and being an advocate. So being led by the heartstrings or being led by kind of objective truth, and how sometimes, we all have emotions. Humans are very emotional creatures, but that can actually hinder your cause if you're relying too much on that and not on the actual facts.
And there's a reason that like a major in ecology is different than a major in environmental science or environmental studies.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. And I mean, a lot of it's crossing
there's
over.
There's a lot of overlap. But,
to understand where you're supposed to be, just because you love ecology doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be an advocate, an activist. You're probably going to be an advocate, because we're all as scientists should be advocates. If you find in a research study that the population you're looking at is not doing well because they don't have enough food, it's good to then share that with the greater public who may not have access to that paper that you published. So that's a way in which we can share what we know. And there's more of that happening nowadays, realizing that we don't sit in the ivory tower and we actually go beyond and we say, okay, well, how can we show the public who may not read a journal article, how can we actually explain to them what the important findings are?
Yeah. And having those basic building blocks of like understanding how carrying capacity works and populations and like all of those things you're going to get into before you even start to even think about environmentalism or anything. You need to learn all of those before you can go anywhere, regardless of where you go. And like so much of what we talk about, especially in our conversations, is about literally just about carrying capacity or like the lack of knowledge to understand carrying capacity in certain populations. So like, you got to start at the bottom and go from there.
It allows you to be able to think through things properly, to not just take what people tell you, but to be able to say, okay, they're talking about carrying capacity instead of what is that, and I'm going to take whatever the media says about the study, for example, as what it is. I understand carrying capacity, and now I understand the importance of what the scientists or the educators are telling me.
And where they're coming from as opposed to the media. That was amazing. So just good. Let's just talk about ecology.
But no,
exactly.
But let's talk about your research, because you're doing some really cool stuff and you've done some really cool stuff, and I believe you're going to do some real cool stuff, so let's talk about that.
So of course I have my hands in many pots and have in the past. That's common for marine mammal scientists to not just do one thing. The heart of what I do is, of course, I'm in charge of this long-term research project. That is another ecological thing that I taught my students recently, the importance and value of big, long data sets on pilot whales that summer off Cape Breton Island. And so this project has been going on since 1998. It's one of the longest pilot whale focused studies in the world, and the long-term pilot whale focused studies in the world, which is really cool. There's a lot of long-term data sets out there, but very few of them that are focused predominantly on pilot whales. Without, there's more funding for things like killer whales or right whales. So it's very easy to not focus on pilot whales if that's not going to get you the means to do your studies. So this is really unique because it's not the only place in the world it happens, but there's very few places where we find that pilot whales come in really close to shore, and so much that it's just a stone's throw. So really, really close. They're feeding on squid, they're feeding on herring, they're feeding on mackerel, a number of things in close, and they come every summer, and we get 30 to 40% of individuals returning. So as far as I know, worldwide, the only other place that I've really heard about is certain parts of the coast of Norway, where they have the same kind of recurrent. And other than that, most places where they see longfin pilot whales close to shore, they're really just passing through. Resightings rates are really low. And so it doesn't make the ideal place to look at things like social structure and who's hanging out with who and who's coming back every year. So that's really neat. But it means they're also really accessible. So pilot whales are usually these pelagic, deep water, deep diving cetaceans, we think of them as like on the continental shelf or even off the continental shelf. And so for, in Nova Scotia, the continental shelf is like 100 nautical miles away. So you can't just get on a boat and go out and study the whales and come in the evenings. That's a whole, when we do the northern bottlenose whale research as part of the Whitehead Lab, you're out there for a couple weeks. It takes a while to get out there, and it's not worth coming back in and going back out unless you've got a hurricane coming or something. So it's a super convenient place to study them. One of the only really convenient places in the world that we know for the longfin pilot whales. Doesn't mean that there's not other places. And like I said, the coast of Norway shows some promise that way, but really most other places, they seem to be just passing through. And so resightings rates are really low. I've looked at the pilot whales off Western Iceland. Orca Guardians has sent me some photo ID over the years, and there's quite low resighting rates there. So just not the same whales coming back every year.
What about Western Australia? I know they get lots of pilot whales there. Are they even doing IDing?
They're starting to do research with them there. So that's pilot whales is kind of the up and coming area. So back when I started with pilot whales in 2013, I did my master's in acoustics, looking at kind of how acoustics maps onto social structure. There were very few people. There was some research that has been done. Obviously, pilot whales, we have a fair amount of research compared to many species of cetaceans, but not nearly as much as bottlenose dolphins or sperm whales or the more kind of well-known long-term research groups. Yeah. And so what seemed to happen was there was a couple areas of the world where there was a set of papers published from, but most of the studies, it's almost like people came, did a study, and then ran away to something else, because pilot whales are like studying a bunch of 8th graders. They know what's going on. Chaotic. So we're just starting to get the technology that's going to allow us to better understand these kind of moderately chaotic cetaceans. So it's not like studying a whole bunch of common dolphins. That's even harder in most places in the world, but it is certainly harder than studying sperm whales or studying in many areas or studying your killer whales. It's just a little bit harder because you're getting 30, 40, 50, sometimes several hundred whales together. And to ID all of those whales when they're socializing or when they're foraging, you have to commit quite seriously to that. And also, have a long-term data set where you can piece apart. Because if you're always seeing, 7, 8 family groups together, it's going to take a while to figure out who's actually part of which group.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have a question, but first I'm going to make a note before people start typing their emails. Pilot whales are dolphins. We are not the people who named them. Take it up with Linnaeus. And, okay, how do you ID a pilot whale?
So pilot whales are ID'd fairly similar to an orca. Okay. They're actually close relatives. So pilot whales are the second largest oceanic dolphin species. And we say pilot whales, normally you're like, well, is it short fin or long fin? Because that's kind of ambiguous. Always say, oh, it's pilot whales. And we know there's 2 species. It's actually complicated because longfin pilot whales are on average bigger than shortfin pilot whales, but we've got 3 described and potentially more subtypes of shortfin pilot whales.
Of course we do.
So they're kind of starting to look like they're phenotypically different. They're genotypically different. They're starting to look almost like ecotypes in pilot
Good
whales.
luck
and
with
so
that.
There's one type, the Shiho shortfin pilot whale, which lives along the western side of North and South America. So those are the ones you see in Baja, Mexico, off the coast, in the upwellings off the Galapagos. And they're actually bigger than the longfin pilot whales.
Oh my God.
But the longfin pilot whales are bigger than the other types of shortfin pilot whales. So it's complicated.
Okay.
We just say pilot whales.
Are their fins actually correct in the short and length, and it's just the actual body size?
Yeah. So when we talk about the fins, it's the pectoral fins. So the flippers, and the short fin pilot whales, they're short and sickle shaped.
Okay.
And in the long fin pilot whales, they're long and they have an elbow.
Oh, I don't think I knew that. That's cool.
Young longfin pilot whales sometimes have a bit shorter looking ones. They grow as they grow up. The neat thing about the Shiho type shortfin pilot whale is that it actually has in-betweenish fins. It doesn't have the elbow, but it has bigger pectoral fins than the other shortfin pilot whale subtypes.
Just making things more complicated. If you get into the place that does taxonomy, let us know so we can sneak in and make our case for killer whales.
I think we're still very much figuring out what's going on with the pilot whales.
Okay.
It's quite complicated. So anyways, they have this dorsal fin on the back. It's not tall like a lot of, orca dorsal fins, but it is very bulky. So it's kind of short and squat, and it's this unique rounded shape. Pilot whale fins, dorsal fins are like nothing else out there. They're really easy to distinctive. And then what we do is we look at the nicks and notches on those dorsal fins. Now, in our population, only about 51% of whales have nicks and notches that are kind of distinct enough for us to be able to ID them very easily. And we are working with about 3,000 to 4,000 pilot whales. So it's not like a smaller population of orcas, something like that. It's actually complicated. What we're hoping is that technology, and we're getting to that point, will help us with other features to ID the whales that are hard to tell apart because they don't have nice distinct dorsal fins. Right. And so one thing that they do have is they have saddle patches. So it's the only other group besides the orcas that have these nice distinctive saddle patches. And the southern hemisphere longfin pilot whales have really nice ones, but our northern longfin pilot whales, they're kind of, obvious on some and a little less obvious on other individuals.
What about, I know they've got like chest markings. Obviously it's harder to see, but is that anything for IDs, or is it just everybody's got the same?
So if you could see them all the time, they are actually unique.
Okay.
So if when they spy hop, you can see these beautiful, they're almost like angel wings or an anchor patch, as we call it. And they are unique between individuals. They look a little bit like fingerprints. Some of them have black kind of intrusions in them, which is super cool. But you just don't see them enough to be able to tell who's who.
Right. Mm-hmm. Totally fair. Like getting, especially in like 3,000, 4,000, like that would be insane. Yeah.
If they spy hopped all the time, it would be great. Well, but they don't. Like they do spy hop often, but often, they're facing away from you, or it's just not ideal. So it's not a practical way, at least at this point, to ID individuals.
But helpful if you get it. Absolutely. Cool.
Oh, I was going to say, just because you brought up the markings, in case I forget it later, that was one of the neatest things I actually discovered. So one of my neat findings was that, so I was working on this chapter on reproduction in pilot whales, which is part of the Sex and Cetaceans book. It's open access, it's online. And there was a group of us working together, and we were almost done the final draft that we were going to send in to get peer reviewed. And there was this mass stranding that occurred in Cape Cod. And I was looking at the pictures. I think there was 6 whales that ended up on shore. And I was looking at these pictures. And I've, at that point, was working with pilot whales for about 7 years. And I was looking and I was like, why are the markings so different underneath these pilot whales?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out you can sex them from their markings, just like orcas, if not a little easier than orcas. And including when they're in the womb, I've seen from strandings, from necropsies, not yet born, and you can already tell what they are from these markings. And this has been lost to science. So nobody had formally written about it. There was some information from the Newfoundland drive hunts. They used to hunt the pilot whales up in Newfoundland in Canada. And there was a picture that said, a male and a female pilot whale, but it was never described. And so everybody forgot about this. I asked the stranding networks, and none of these stranding networks realized that it was that straightforward. And so this was something that was kind of rediscovered and became part of that chapter on reproduction and what we know of that. So now with drone footage, you can actually, if they roll upside down, which they do fairly often, you can actually sex the individuals based on their underside marking.
That's so cool.
That is amazing.
And handy, but like in a sneaky way of like, we can tell you things, but you really got to wait for us to, do it.
On the drone footage, they swim upside down a fair amount, especially the young ones. So if you manage to get young ones with nicks and notches, you can actually know from a very early age
what they are.
Yeah.
Nice. And do they have the normal mammary slits and all of that kind of jazz as well? Of course, just harder to see.
Yeah, that's just harder to see. It's also hard because there is some random exceptions. Like there's the occasional male found with kind of mammary slits or false mammary slits. And so it's always, it's actually easier to ID them by pattern in some ways than it is to have to check underneath. And like most of the time it is straightforward if you can get that close of a look.
Yeah.
But again, you look at like old stranding pictures, and now with the old stranding pictures, you can actually look at ratios if you have that data.
That's so
whereas
cool.
Before you had to do, sometimes you had to do it by DNA, because nobody actually took the time to look in these whale strands.
Wow. Yeah. Very handy. Good job, pilot whales.
At least something straightforward.
Yeah. So as much as we would love to hear about all pilot whales all the time, you happen to be extremely lucky and well studied and exposed, all the words. You have just such a plethora of various cetaceans, and I think especially for the three of us, because we are West Coast based and you're East Coast based, a lot of cetaceans we don't actually hear well, we don't have a lot of personal experiences, but we also don't hear a lot about. So would you just delight us and our listeners with some of kind of like the bare fin facts, as it were, about what maybe like the bottlenose whales that you've worked with, or some of the other sort of East Coast cetacean populations?
Absolutely.
Just go for it.
I've talked about the northern bottlenose whales at least once.
Yeah.
Was lovely. So the northern bottlenose whales are an endangered, at least in Canada, endangered species of beaked whale. So everyone hears northern bottlenose whales and they're like, oh, bottlenose dolphins, I know what those are. And we're like, no. This is actually a bottlenose whale. It's, a very offshore, deep diving.
And they're huge.
Yeah. They're over 10 meters
Which is
sometimes.
so weird.
Yeah. So they are a very large species. They're not quite as large as our Baird's beaked whales, but they're on the larger side of the beaked whale spectrum, for sure. And so there is quite a few of them in the North Atlantic, like up to like north of Iceland and the Jan Mayans. They've seen that there's decent populations hiding elsewhere. But the population that lives off Nova Scotia is a little bit unique. So it lives in this set of submarine canyons. One of them is called the Gully. It's one of our first official marine protected areas in Canada, and the one we're very proud about. And then they use two other canyons, smaller canyons to the north of there sometimes, and they seem to not mix as much with the other population of bottlenose whales that we see kind of off Newfoundland and north of that. Okay. So there probably is some connectivity, but this group off Nova Scotia seems to be fairly unique. And they were actually northern bottlenose whales are really neat because a lot of the time they're quite friendly and curious. And so when we're out there and we have to travel 100 nautical miles offshore, it takes about a day and a half to get out there. We're in a 40-foot sailboat when we go and study them.
It makes you feel super good in your tum-tum.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are sleeping a lot in the first couple days they go out. Actually, I have a pretty good stomach. I'm often put on first cooking duties.
Okay.
Who the captain is for the trip.
You're popular.
But usually in Canada, I'm okay. Because for me, almost everybody does have some level at which they get motion sick. But for me, it takes quite a bit. And it also takes a lot of heat.
Yep.
And we don't have a lot of heat off the East Coast.
Nope.
So that's not there. And so there's no problem. But yeah, going out, it's a journey to get out there. You're with 5 other people sometimes on this, 4 or 5 other people on this 40-foot sailboat. It's just bare basics, because it's almost like the older style of research. Like it's really fun, that exploratory. And you go out to the gully and you go around the gully, which is not, it is a big submarine canyon, but the area that they use is not super huge. And so we find them just as often sometimes in the fog as we do during the nice days, which is part of that kind of curiosity. I've given the nickname for them and a few others who were with me on one of the trips. We call them whoopee cushions of the sea, because they actually like to come. There was a couple nights that year that they would come behind the boat after dark, like 8 p.m. and hang out till like 10 p.m. just under the stern, and they'd come up and make fart noises at the surface. And it was strangely amusing. But if you could be a fly on the wall, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall at that point after a hard days of work where you photo ID. And it's not a very large population. So I don't know the exact recent numbers, but kind of about 140 with some confidence intervals. We don't know whether they stay there all year round, but we know they're there in every month of the year. There's been acoustic studies that have looked at that. And so, they some of them are really friendly. Others don't want to see you, and that's fine. With research, you just, if the whales don't want to see you, you walk away, you wait for the next group to come. And, that's an area we know they have calves sometimes. So I've seen a few really cute young northern bottlenose calves. Because it's a relatively small population and we're seeing the same whales between years, we're able to study things like their social structure and going on. You can tell a lot of the males have very flat kind of foreheads, and so the mature males, you can also usually get a good idea of who they are. It's a little bit more complicated though, and it's a good thing in some ways. It's a smaller population in the sense that if you had 4,000 of them, it would be a bit hard because their markings are more subtle often. So some of them have nicks and notches, but a lot of other ones, you're looking at other body scars. And for the bottlenose whales, they sometimes do heal over time, but it seems like a very slow process. So with a pilot whale, if you had a linear scar or a linear rake, just kind of like a big line, it would heal really quick. In a couple of months, you wouldn't really see it. But on a northern bottlenose whale, you can see it 10 years later, sometimes 15 or 20 years later. So we end up using those more subtle, what we would think of temporary markings in pilot whales are actually much longer term markings in northern bottlenose whales, which is really interesting.
How big are their calves?
Their calves are fairly small. I mean, it's a similar size ratio to a lot of other cetaceans. I'd say right whale calves like this one are actually born a lot smaller in terms of size. You see all those cute new pictures coming out for the coast where we have now 18 right whale calves seen, which is amazing. But yeah, no, with the bottlenose whales, they look quite tiny alongside mum or the carer. We say that because in a lot of different cetaceans, there is sometimes a little bit of what we call allocare or babysitting in common language. And so you have to really, especially with pilot whales, sometimes you see the little babies right up alongside a big male, a big mature male, and you're like, yeah, that's not mom. So with the bottlenose whales, we're not sure about how often allocaring happens. I'm pretty sure it probably does, because I've seen an adult with a baby and then without a baby, and then it was back with a baby at some point. And it makes sense because they're diving deep.
Right.
So this is, on the edge of the continental shelf, and you don't want to leave the young one alone.
Yeah.
But they're pretty cute and tiny. I can send you a picture.
Oh, yeah,
of them.
absolutely. So is it
amazing?
Just males that have the big forehead? Flat forehead?
Yeah, so the females do have a big kind of bottle-shaped head. I mean,
they've got the rostrum, and
very, very big and round, but they're very rounded and not that kind of flat front profile.
And so then calves have just like normal baby heads, or
yeah, and they're fairly similar in some ways in shape to what a subadult or a mature female would be. Whereas the males, it's really when they mature that you start to see that fatter.
Fascinating. Literally never thought about that before, because I don't know anything about bottlenose whales. It was like maybe 2 years ago when I discovered that they're so freaking big. So.
Well, you don't have them off the West Coast,
exactly,
right?
And so like all I've ever done is seen photos of them, like with nothing to like showcase before. So it's weird. Like even when we saw bards, they were way bigger than. I don't know why I thought beaked whales were tiny, but they're not really.
Well, some of them are. So we have sourbees beaked whales.
Oh, you do?
They're not tiny. I mean, any cetacean is going to be fairly large. Like even harbor porpoises. Try lifting one of those into the back of the pack. It takes a little to work. You can tell. I've done a lot of.
I was going to say that sounds.
Yeah, been there, done that. But I help the local stranding network in Nova Scotia, the Marine Animal Response Society. When I'm up there, especially with things that happen in Cape Breton, where I am is like 6-hour drive from Halifax. So if we see something and can help them that way, we gladly do it. So yeah, the harbor porpoise, that comes with a story. We've had them on the back of boats before, found them dead floating in the ocean, and of course. Thing you can do is bring them to shore, because we like to know why they died.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So is it natural causes? Often with the harbor porpoises, it is, and then you've got to ask yourself, well, is it something that was a disease or something that we maybe should be concerned about, or is it a more natural kind of one by one case? Right. And that's really important for conservation. And, we do have epidemics that happen in whales. So like the Mediterranean longfin pilot whales, a whole bunch of them, it's not a very large population, wiped out by mobilivirus not too long ago. And so conservation wise, then that's a concern. How are they recovering? Are they recovering? Should we give them more protections? And so it's really important to know what's going on in the different populations of whales and dolphins out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So sourbees, are they obviously bigger than harbor porpoises, but so where are they on the map of cetacean sizes?
I would say they're a smaller beaked whale, but they're still decently sized. I can't, don't off the top of my head.
Of course. Yeah.
Them. But they look a lot smaller, of course, compared to these bottlenose whales. When you're out there, they only look like about a quarter of the size.
Okay.
And they have this really unique pattern where when they surface, their really long rostrum comes up before you see the rest of the whale.
Oh, no.
So we call them the mosquitoes of the sea, because you get this long needle poking out, and then you start to see the rest of the whale. And they tend to be a lot more skittish than our northern bottlenose whales, but sometimes you do get to see them well when you're out there.
That's cool. And then with the deepness, do you get sperm whales out there, or?
Occasionally, the males.
Okay.
It's a little bit too far north for the females and the calves.
Right.
They're more subtropical, tropical for the most part. And but what's neat about the gully is it does have some influence from the Gulf Stream. So with the Gulf Stream influence, the waters are quite warm. out in the Gully compared to what you would expect to find, say, off Newfoundland. And we do get some subtropical species that kind of have a little bit of a bigger range that we see there. So, for example, we see striped dolphins out there, okay, which are not something you think of as being found in Canadian waters.
Not at all.
But yeah, which is super cool.
That's cool. And then you've got North Atlantic killer whales. I don't know. We're not calling them type 1 and type 2 anymore. I can't keep track.
No. It's much more complicated than that.
Of course it is.
And I think we really backed off from that until we start to learn a little bit more about them.
Right.
So right now it seems like a bit of a chaotic mess. And we see that in the North Atlantic for whatever reason, that populations seem to not be quite as defined as we see them in some other parts of the world. And that's okay. I think as biologists, we're like, oh no, it doesn't fit in the box. We want to be able to
our favorite.
But we have to learn we can't shove everything into a box. That just doesn't work. So with pilot whales, right now, the whole North Atlantic is considered one population. With northern bottlenose whales, there's not really, like, we talk about the population in the Gully, but we don't really, in terms of closed populations, have an understanding of whether there's where the boundaries are, if there's closure that way. It seems like the pilot whales on the west side don't really go too far to the east, but we don't know for sure.
Right.
So it's not like they can't. We know right whales, North Atlantic right whales, gone across. So it's not like they can't, but maybe there's a bit of a separation with the southern Greenland current where we see a little bit of separation between the two sides for some species. But again, there's so many gaps in knowledge there that we just don't fully understand what's going on.
Have you ever seen Old Tom?
No. So it actually took me 10
right, you
years
sent
to
that
see
story. Yeah, the Atlantic. Yeah.
So yeah, that was another story that I sent in. I know people who have seen Old
which is
Tom,
cool.
but unfortunately, I mean, it's a very different end of the province from what I work in, and it shows up one day a year. Sometimes they only see him on the New Brunswick side that year. Sometimes he doesn't show up. Sometimes he comes twice. So it's really, you have to be working there pretty consistently to be able to see him. I mean, his story kind of captures everyone, I think, because it's like, oh, there's this killer whale and he's always surrounded by dolphins and he doesn't be interacting. He might interact with killer whales out there. We don't know, because honestly, there's very few days in the year we see him, but it doesn't look like a normal relationship. What's actually really cool is with pilot whales, there was a very similar thing that happened. It's documented as a scientific note in the literature, but we don't really talk about it. So there was a lone pilot whale that was always seen hanging out in with Atlantic white-sided dolphins. But that was more observed by the scientists. And at that point, with not as much social media, it's harder to spread stories. It was before my time studying them. And so that didn't really become kind of this. I mean, people also have this fascination with it, right? I was joking with the board game, it brings out the good and the bad in everyone. There's always a lot of excitement and a lot of passion. Yes. But that's certain species there are like that. It tends to be the more well-studied ones, the ones the public cares about more because we know more about them. But there's a lot of cool cetaceans that get missed out on.
Well, now I'm wondering what it is about white-sided dolphins that people want to hang out with, right? Like they just, we're talking about northern residents spending so much time with Pacific white-sided and this pilot whale with Atlantic. Is Atlantic, are they separate now? Again, they're different, right?
Very distantly, but they're not like sister species.
Okay, so is it the Atlantics that are still legs?
No, it's the white beak.
I knew there's some. Gracious. It's too complicated.
So I have seen white beak dolphins before too. They're very infrequent visitors to Cape Breton where we do our work.
They're so weird looking.
Oh, they're really cool. Lots of people have made the mistake. They see them and they're like, "Oh, young killer whales!" Like, because they're black and white, right? It's kind of like over here. If you don't know what a doll's corpus is and you happen to see them, you might make that error. And if you know what you're looking at, you won't. But you also can't look down upon the people who don't know because they think, "Oh, black and white, it must be."
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm sure with pilot whales, you get that at times too.
People think they're black beluga.
Like that makes sense.
They don't know what they are if they haven't seen them. They're like they remind me of a beluga, but there's something that's just a little bit different.
It's definitely it's got the thing. But then also I've definitely had it, especially in more tropical waters with false killer whales. I'm just like, I don't know, like how do you tell unless you like see more of the colorings and stuff too? Like there's a reason they're all related. They all got that.
Well, some of the blackfish are really good.
Yeah, really hard.
Like, you know, if you get a distant look at a pygmy killer whale versus a melon-headed whale versus, you know, only see really distantly false killer whales and don't get a good look at them, like it can be hard. I think the melonheads and the pygmies are the hardest too, because their dorsal fin's a little bit more similar. Yeah. But yeah, if you don't know what you're looking at, a lot of times I'll get sent a video from somewhere in Indonesia and they'll be like, "Oh, pilot whales," as false killer whales.
Yeah.
And I know that in New Zealand they have the same problem. Sometimes when strandings are reported, I mean, usually they are pilot whales, but everybody's expecting pilot whales so much that false killer whales or even short fin pilot whales get lumped in with long fin pilot whales.
Yeah. So confusing.
So confusing.
It is. It's a big confusing world out there. And I always tell my students when I'm teaching marine mammals, like, there's approximately this many species, plus or minus, because there's always going to be something going on. But are we gonna? It was first the common dolphins were long beak and short beak, and they're put together, and now there's talk about maybe that's not the way it should be anymore. So it's always, we're lumping and splitting all the time.
Yeah. Does it ever? I don't. This is so weird because we care so much on this podcast about this, but like, they don't care. The animals don't care.
No,
they know what they're doing.
Anyway, the concept of species is entirely human. So, when we're trying to figure out, are orcas a set of different species? Are they the same? What's going on? Like, that's us making a delineation. For them, what we consider a species level is probably not the most important thing. And that's why a lot of scientists now are arguing maybe like cultural units are really important rather than, because within humans, cultural units are really important. Like, that's where we at least should see the value in things and the differences. But I mean, with killer whales, maybe we're looking at it wrong by trying to lump and split. But the other side of it is, too, as a scientist, nobody cares about conservation unless it is a species.
Right, exactly.
So there is a drive to make sure things are given a species label so that you can protect them.
Yeah, and I think it's just going back to our soapbox again of like, it doesn't matter, but then sometimes you look at like Southerns and type Ds and you're like, but really? Like, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Southern resident killer whales. Yeah, it's
But
have you seen images on the pilot whales? Because there's some beautiful new illustrations on pilot whales that may also think the same.
Okay,
things.
Good to know.
So,
yeah, it's just one of those things. But I definitely agree. I think with the cultural and and like all of the stuff about what makes a species, because they're out there making hybrids all over the damn place, so it doesn't really count anyway. Or so. Anyway, that's why we should be in charge of cetacean species.
Or the inverse would be figure out ways to write legislation to protect animals rather than a specific species.
Yeah.
Also, like, because I think that's really the crux of it, right?
When it's like conservation biology, we talk a lot about how conservation decisions are ultimately driven by values. And, in science, we're all objective. Nobody wants to talk about values and ethics and things like that. But really, our conservation decisions are being driven by values. And so we need to learn how to retorque our values to maybe understand that sometimes lower levels in species are important. So, like you say, the legislation is kind of hindering us. It's making us think, okay, well, we have to make it a species, or there's some groups that are going to argue that we can't protect them because, hey, with orcas, there's lots of orcas all over the world. Why would we protect one small group?
So complicated. And we just want to be out there and learning things about like, where do northern bottlenose whales go? Do they go somewhere? Like, I don't know. What are they doing?
We don't know. They do show up in the Azores at certain times of year, but they're not, as far as we know, the same ones as we see. Where they're coming from, who knows? But I mean, we also know, there's been some studies, movement studies, that have shown that there's a lot of these northeastern Atlantic species that can end up down close to the Azores. And so whether that movement also is seen on the western side of the North Atlantic, we don't know. A lot of our, with the pilot whales, we think that for the most part, it's kind of an onshore-offshore movement. So offshore in winters, continental shelf, offshore in the summers. And we don't know how far that movement is. The kind of one of the biggest hints we've gotten towards that was there was a completely white pilot whale. Whether it was or albino, we don't know, but it was seen around for a couple decades, and they saw it as far south as Cape Cod and as far north as southern Nova Scotia. So that is a bit of a trek, but also Massachusetts is not that far from Nova
it's
Scotia.
not as far as you think it might be.
So yeah, as to how much this movement, and with bottlenose whales, it's even harder because there's been less effort. They're further offshore, at least the pilot whales you see in the kind of the shelf waters sometimes. And so we really don't know. But there's also, you've got to consider, is that the most important thing to learn? Because with tagging, there's always ethics that you got to think about it. Like, is it worth the potential harm to a whale, depending on what type of tag you use? And, our technology is still getting better that way. But I think we're still answering other questions right now. And so this, where do they move, hasn't become the most critical question out there. It's interesting. We'd love to know, but there's more important things to ask right now.
How long do pilot whales live for?
That's still a little bit debated. We know that the males can probably live 30 to 40, and the females seem to be closer to about 50. That's what the guidebooks will tell you. Really, without more long-term studies like we see in orcas, we're not going to be able to say, like that might be a maximum age, or it might be an age that is attained with some regularity. And so we see within orcas, different populations have different age ranges, different lifespans that we're seeing. Some of those may be affected by stressors, but some may be the life history of that population as well. So what we do know is that there's some really interesting things going on between the northern longfin pilot whales and the southern hemisphere longfin pilot whales, which are two different subspecies. The life history is faster in the southern longfin. And they also strand more often. They seem to attain slightly smaller sizes. They mature faster. And from the data that we have, seem to have a slightly less of a lifespan, whereas the northern hemisphere longfin pilot whales seem to be more like some of our shortfin pilot whales with their life history, which is super fascinating.
Is that anything to do with cold? I guess not, if the short fins are also
temperate. We don't know, because often when you look at like southern hemisphere species that are also in the northern hemisphere, they're bigger down there. And so the pilot whales kind of
flipped.
This is the opposite. And so we're wondering, is there less, like, do they have to hunt harder for their food? Is it maybe less available? Or do they have, more hazards to navigation where it's beneficial to reproduce a little bit earlier? They're also really brightly colored. So they have these really distinctive saddle patches, way more than even orcas. They almost look like cattle, like black and white cattle in some ways. It would be the dream population. ID every single one very easily. And, but at the same time, why do they have those bright colors? Is it to use predators? Is it that they do some more kind of group hunting that we don't see as often in pilot whales as we do some other species? So that's still a bit of a mystery as to why we see kind of such distinct differences between the two groups.
So many mysteries.
I feel like there's a song there. I also feel like, Elizabeth, Lindsay has been carrying us in our questions, and it's just because I'm so fascinated. I think this is going to be a great episode for our listeners, because I'm just like, oh, right, shoot, I'm supposed to be asking questions too, right? And I'm like, no, I just want to. I'm just listening.
Well, and I just can't stop thinking of questions. So,
which is great.
Go for it.
Did we talk about sperm whales yet? Can we talk about sperm whales?
No, we can talk about sperm whales. So sperm whales, again, it's research I've collaborated on, so I'm not quite as involved in it as I am in the pilot whale work. But I have had the privilege of, again, in the same 40-foot sailboat, studying sperm whales both off the Galapagos Island in the Pacific and off the Lesser Antilles down in the Caribbean. And what's fascinating is that the sperm whales in the Pacific have a very different kind of, the base social structure is similar, but the size of the groups we see is completely different than what we see in the Atlantic. So in the Atlantic, they're quite small social units. In the Caribbean, we have EC1s and EC2s, so Eastern Caribbean 1 and Eastern Caribbean 2. You can tell them apart by their codas, which are a series of clicks. So the EC1, it goes click, 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 click. And when you hear that in the codas, I'm listening to the EC1s. Whereas the EC2s are like click, 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 click. They're a 5-pattern, more regularly spaced click. And then there's a potential that we might even have a third clan down there. They're still working on that. And that's down in the Lesser Antilles. And then they're going to, really exciting, they're going to do some work up towards the kind of the Bahamas area a little bit more to see, okay, is there other sperm whales living up here? We don't really know. Like all those other islands in the Caribbean, aside from the Lesser Antilles, we don't really know what's going on. So we could have a bunch of like very regional sperm whale groups, whereas in the Pacific it's big wide open, and some of the what we call vocal clans are really widely spread across the Pacific, and some of them are quite regional. And some of them, the Galapagos, which was really fascinating there, is when my PhD supervisor, Dr. Hal Whitehead, when he was there initially, he heard 2 vocal clans of sperm whales. And then when he went back later, it was 2 different vocal clans of sperm whales. So what happened? Why don't we hear those original 2 groups there? We are not sure. But that's why this important of, even if you can't be there every year, this long-term data set is really important. And so our lab tends to be back about 2 years per decade in the Galapagos, which is
perhaps really they, like us, were traveling to visit the Galapagos and then went home
and decided, hey, this place is really great.
This place is really great. We like it here. These iguanas.
They had a long vacation. No, something changed. And that's the thing with the Pacific, is when you have these El Nino and La Nina events, there can be really big changes. I mean, there was the same with pilot whales. So back in the 60s, 70s, you'd see all these Shiho type short fin pilot whales around the Catalina Islands in the southern part of California. And then there was an El Nino in the mid 1980s that they had a collapse of market squid. There was also some pressure on the pilot whales, so some of them were captured, and then some were also just kind of shot or injured through kind of conflict with the fisheries. And after that, it's very rare to see pilot whales there now. Down in Mexico, they're fairly common, but they're kind of rare visitors to Southern California these days, when they used to have kind of a seasonal population around those Channel Islands.
Yeah, things are changing. That's what's happening up here. So who knows?
Who knows when? Who knows what? I don't know what's happening to me. I'm sorry. So we have a number of listeners who are very interested in higher education and cetacean research in particular. And I think they would absolutely love to hear about how you got to where you are, what your PhD was like, the things that, the highs and lows of the various researches that you've done, and a career in academia and in marine sciences, but also just like the moments on your winding road that really stick out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long road. So I talked a bit about how when I was younger, I was already interested in cetaceans. But my parents, I don't even remember when I started to be interested in them. They said when I was about 6 months old, I started to show an affinity for marine mammal toys, because I had a little orca, I had a little walrus, and they just kind of ran with it. They said, okay, well, neither of them were marine biologists. My father was a veterinarian, so animal science related, and my mother was in healthcare. And they were like, okay, we've got a kid that loves the ocean. Neither of us really love the ocean, but we'll go. And so when I was 5 years old, at that point, I was very much an orca fanatic at that point. And they took me down to see Keiko being rehabilitated in Oregon before he went to Iceland. That was one of kind of the pivotal moments where I was like, yes, I'm into the right things. 5 years old. When I was 11, they actually took me to see wild northern resident killer whales. So that was my first glimpse of killer whales in the wild. We saw the A12s. I remember it was A33, who's passed on since then. His perfect, beautiful, it's kind of like textbook perfect northern resident fin in the fog. And, I've never looked back from that. Like, I've always wanted to be a marine mammal scientist. I think a lot of people do when they're younger. And a big thing that happens is you're told you can't.
Yeah.
Like, there's no chance. You're not going to make it. You might as well think about something else. The reality is it's hard. So less than 5% of PhD students actually make it into academia. But the other reality about things is where there's a will, there's a way. And if you're flexible with how you do what you want, there's a lot of other opportunities. And so I knew I wanted to teach and do research, and was looking for some way to do both. So I did, typical undergrad. A lot of people think they have to do a marine biology undergrad, but that's not really the truth. It's not accessible to everyone, right? So some people are lucky to have, there's a couple of universities in Canada, like UVic, I think Guelph, and then Dalhousie, that offer marine biology programs. Great. If you can go join one of those, they're fantastic. But you can actually just do a regular biology program. And then you have to work a little bit harder to make yourself stand out. So I did an honors program, did an honors thesis, because I knew I wanted to go into research. And so it's good to get some experience in undergrad. I made sure that I had some sailing skills. because I know that boat handling is often important if you're studying whales and dolphins, not in every situation. So I kind of started to build the skill set that I thought might be convenient. I remember my first experience with field work was actually up at Orca Lab because they take volunteers. And so I went up there for a summer, and that introduced me to land-based research. And they had a lot of journal articles you could read. Of course, they introduced me to the acoustics. And killer whales are a little bit easier of an acoustic system to start with because, of course, the northern residents have each pod a discrete set of calls that we know about, we've studied, and so you can actually track them at night. If you're good enough to know the differences between these groups, these matriline's, you can actually tell, okay, yeah, so we've got an A5 group here, and they're making their way around Hansen Island. And so that was really neat. And so I think when you're an undergrad, it's good to get some skills like boat handling, something like that, even if it's like the little sail club that your university has, which sometimes happen on lakes, sometimes happen on the ocean. And then to try to get yourself into some field work experience. And it doesn't have to be with cetaceans. There's limited cases. I think one of the unfortunate things is that because there's not a lot of funding around, often it costs you money to go and get experience. So with the Cape Breton Pilot Whale Project, what we actually do is I don't take people along unless we can break even. So I don't always have funding because pilot whales are not an endangered species to be able to pay people money. But what I can do is I can pay for accommodations, I can pay for your food, and I can pay for the travel from Halifax. Nice. So if you can get yourself there, instead of having to pay for everything yourself, if you're part of our team, I'll at least cover your basic costs. And so that is just an effort to try to make it more accessible than it would be if you, say, had to pay an internship fee or you were responsible. A lot of cases you get opportunities where you have to pay for travel and you have to pay for housing and you have to pay for your own food and then you have to help with research. And that's not ideal. And I know it's hard. And there's so much demand for it that you can fund programs that way. And so that's become a model. But of course, that means that it's accessible to people who have the money to be able to do that. And especially in this day and age, it's not a ton of people who have the resources to be able to do a program like that. Yeah. And so, places like Orca Lab, you have to pay for a bit of your food, or at least had to traditionally in the back, you had to get yourself there. But I mean, you're camping in the woods. And so cost-wise, it was a really nice first field season to do. You learn a lot and you get to learn how to live in kind of a rustic setting with other people. And that's an important part of doing field work. When you're 5 people or 6 people on a boat, 40-foot sailboat in the middle of nowhere, you can't be someone that has a big personal bubble. You have to learn how to jive with people, even if they're not always exactly your best friends, right? You just learn to work together and learn to get along. And that makes you a good biologist for doing these kind of boat work where you're together all the time. And so for pilot whale fieldwork for my PhD, we were together 24/7 for 2 months. We were getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning to go out and to study the whales before the whale watches would go, because you can't in Canada drone around the public. And so we'd use kind of the mornings and the evenings to do that. The weather was usually a little bit better. And you could see the blows really well on the horizon, especially of larger whales like fin whales. So that was really nice time. I'm a morning person, so I always had great pleasure. The very first day I'd wake them up would be my birthday. That was the day before field season officially started. I got to get them all up at 4 o'clock. And you know what? By the 5th day out, the whales worked like coffee. So as long as you saw cetaceans, everybody was fine. We had 1 week, I think it was 2019, we had 1 week where we worked from like 4:30 a.m. every day to about 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. We came back in, we went as observers out on whale watch boats all day, and then we took the boats out that evening and droned until like nearly 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, 7 days in a row. And then there was a wind day and none of us left the house. So it was like at that point we had really, burned the midnight oil, as they say, we'd really done everything. But it was, you got to the end of the 7th day and you're like, I can't do this anymore. Like you wear yourself out. But then once you had that rest on the 8th day, you were like, perfect, let's go again. We're good to go. But that's how research is. Sometimes, with the Galapagos, sometimes it's really hard to find a group of sperm whales. And once you find them, you have to keep them. It's like a game of hot potato. So you can track them for 6 days. You can track them for 14 days. You don't want to be the ones to lose them. And actually the dolphins are the villains in this story, because they come and surround the hydrophone. So you can't hear the sperm whales and where they're going at night. Where I remember one night, I got past, we do 2-hour watches by ourselves. So it was trial by fire, 2-hour watches at night. You had to deal with the boat and directing the boat. steering the boat and picking your directions, nobody else around. And you had to track these whales. And the person before me on watch was like, well, they made a few codas like 5 minutes ago and now they're quiet. I was like, oh no.
I'm gonna lose the
whales. For an hour and 45 minutes, I was just sitting there. I was like, there's no whales. I hope too, because I was like, maybe they're sleeping. There's no sounds being made. And then like 5 minutes before my watch traded over to the next person, I started hearing codas and I was like, here, there you go. I'm done. I've survived. The whales are still here. I didn't lose them.
Yay.
Way to go. But that's probably one of the most difficult field seasons, because even with the northern bottlenose, we don't tend to track them overnight. We know they're in this canyon, so we just do in the canyon or sail around a little bit. With the sperm whales in the Galapagos, it's a lot harder. There's no guarantee if you lose them that you'll find them again in that 2-week trip. Right. Whereas in the Eastern Caribbean, much more likely to be able to find them again, because they're smaller groups and there's certain areas where they're very predictable.
It's important to think about.
Yeah, I think the days are long and fun, but they're also long, and sometimes then you get like 4 wind days and you're like, I'm gonna lose my mind.
And that's why it's a really good thing to try that out in undergrad, because for some people that's not the work that they're meant to do. You go to a kind of remote or rural field season, and there's actually a couple listservs that can help you with that. So of course Marmam for marine mammal based work, but there's Ecolog as well, which sometimes has more paid positions, or at least have more heavily subsidized positions. They might be terrestrially based, but you're getting the same skills. You're building the same skills along the way. So whether you're studying mountain goats or whether you're studying birds or whether you're studying bats, you're still building those valuable skill sets to work towards grad school. I think one of the hardest parts about grad school is finding your lab. So you've got to reach out early. And the best thing to do is get your foot in the door if you can. So if there's a volunteer position with them, if the graduate students can get to know you, that's fantastic. Otherwise, you're sending emails and professors are really busy. They may or may not have time to answer them. And don't get offended by that. It happens. You can send a follow-up. I think for my master's, I think it was almost 3 months before my then after supervisor got back to me. And, of course, he gets a lot of questions on where to, students wanting to work with him. And you have to have the skill set that fits the lab. And so it's really important that you do, if you have an idea of what kind of research questions you'd like to ask, and then labs that work with that and species where you can answer those questions, that you have an understanding of how they do field work and what would make you a kind of better candidate, a potential position in the lab. In Canada, you have to get your own funding. So you usually apply for an NSERC, and that means you have to kind of pull those grades along, or you might be able to get an industrial NSERC where you don't have to have quite as high grades. It's a different kind of it's more that you might have like an acoustics consulting company that comes alongside you, and if you work on their project, they might be willing to support you through a graduate degree, and usually then you go work for them afterwards. Often is the case. So they're helping train you to be a highly qualified personnel so you can work with them. But you have to think about, okay, how do I enjoy undergrad, still maintain good marks, also have good skills so that marks aren't everything, so that you stand out. And then you just really have to make those connections one way or another, and you can make them through going to conferences, you can make them by being volunteers, undergraduate students, or trying to get some experience where you're related or someone knows someone in that lab. And sometimes it all falls together, and that's what happened for me. It was kind of one of the most bizarre moments in my career. I got out of environmental chemistry labs, and it was a doozy of an environmental chemistry lab. It was long, hard, a little disheartened. I hadn't found a really good master's position yet. This was spring semester of last year, so time is ticking. And, where I ended up for my master's and my PhD, he had said, okay, we have some other people in line. We're going to see whether they get funding. And obviously, if you know people, they're the best choice, 100%. So I get out of the lab and I go to the TA office, because I was also a first-year bio TA, and I look at my email, and I have 2 emails sitting in my email. The first one is from NSERC. It says, you've got your funding for your master's. And the second one is from what would become my supervisor saying, hey, did you get the funding? Because we have a spot in the lab. I don't think any decision was more clear.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like this moment. And I know this doesn't happen for everyone, but it's amazing how if you put the effort into it, the doors will open. And that might take some time. It might take you taking a break from undergrad to do a little bit of research to get the experience that you need to go on. But there are many ways. Some people go into a course-based master's, like at the University of St. Andrews, and then they find their way into a thesis-based PhD. later on. So it's not clear cut. There's not only one way. And then when you get out, that you have to think, is your passion teaching? Is your passion research? Do you want to be out on the water with whales all the time? Because realistically, academia, we get our month or two out on the water, but the office is the realized dream. So if you really want to be out on the water all the time, probably going through and becoming a professor is not ideal because there's a lot of other responsibilities. So it's a hard choice, but I think the message to people is if you want to do it, if you're passionate about it, if the fit is right, and if you're open-minded, then you can make these connections that allow you to, at least for some parts of your life, be involved in this community of research biologists. Where there's a will, there's often a way. And so, obviously it's a field that can't handle every single person who loves whales, but there is more space, I think, than people think if you're willing to be kind of, you're not just sold on the academic stream.
You're a great teacher, Elizabeth.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
that's why I ended up as a teacher, because I think I would be wasted in pure research. Like, I like research, I like collaborative research. That's where kind of my strengths are. I love supervising students. So I, whether they're undergrads or sometimes, like I had this past semester a research intern from another university.
Cool.
And she actually is looking at the spatial positioning of pilot whale calves in relation to their mother or carer from the drone footage I took during my PhD, and how that changes as they get older. And so she did this 4-month research internship and is now looking towards presenting at the European Cetacean Society conference, and that's something that will be really, really exciting. So seeing students have this passion, being able to do the work, and then being able to go and share that work with the wider scientific community.
That's fantastic. Yes. Before we continue with the rest of the episode, we want to take a moment to tell you about how you can support our podcast and everything we do at Whale Tales.
You can join us by becoming a patron at patreon.com/whaletales. You can join for $1 a month at the porpoise level, $5 a month at the dolphin level, or $10 a month at the whale level.
And each level comes with a variety of perks, including polls, thank you postcards, access to extended interviews or extra stories our guests share with us. You can produce your own Fun Flipper Fact segment of the pod if you are a whale level patron. And for our dolphin and whale level patrons, we have an extra every other month podcast that we do called Journal Club, where we read a scientific article and then we kind of break it down and share our thoughts about it. And we read article this coming month, or this month because I can't tell time.
This month.
This month. Yeah.
Thank you. About a whale with very cool teeth.
Ooh. Spoilers. Thank you so much to our patrons. You are amazing, and we are so grateful for all of your support.
Yeah. You're the best. And of course, if you aren't able to support us financially, we completely understand. The world is a lot. There are still tons of ways that you can help us out. You can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice, principally Apple Podcasts or Spotify, where we love reading your comments. And those reviews really help other people find us. Plus, you could also just tell everyone around you. I was going to say everyone in your life, but like you could tell somebody at the grocery store, hey, do you like whales? There's this really cool podcast. But obviously, most importantly, your cetacean science podcast loving friends and family about us so that they can listen to, and then you can talk about the podcast, and it's just great for everybody involved.
Yeah. You can also follow us on social media at whaletales.org or whaletales_org, depending on where we are. Plus, you can send us your feedback so we can help making the podcast even better.
I think that's, in terms of like the main part of our episode, Elizabeth, I think that is as much as unfortunately we can have time for today, though I think there's so much more we could talk about. We'd love to have you back.
Oh my gosh.
But before we wrap our whole episode, it's time for Fun Flipper Fact. It's time for Fun Flipper Fact. Elizabeth, will you share a Fun Flipper Fact, please?
Absolutely. So it didn't take me very long to think about this one. But one of the really cool things, I'm going back to pilot whales, is did you know that long-fin pilot whales are not born at a 50-50% male to female ratio? Past studies have shown in the North Atlantic that males only make up about 30-35% of fetuses in cases where they have. So that's really bizarre. And then when they're born, they have kind of the kind of same mortality, females and males, until they're about 10 years old. And then after 10 years, when they start to go through this process of maturity, and the male mortality rate skyrockets again. So mature male pilot whales they're not super common. Each group kind of has one or two. Sometimes you have a group with a few more. That's the way it is. But really mature pilot whales, it seems like they're born at a lower ratio, and then maybe they have bad risk assessment as they're in their kind of subadult stage.
Oh, you did say they were trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, they are a little bit of trouble. I'm going to admit, it's always the subadult males. If something's gone wrong, in the pilot whales, you just look at the subadult males. And, from my old videos where there has been some, weird things going on or frisky whales, you look at the old shots, you see them roll over, and you're like, yep, that tracks, subadult male.
Huh. That's
crazy.
That's so weird.
This is awesome. Thank you for your fun flip fact. I like that.
That was great.
Much.
Okay. And now we're moving into the reason for the season, which is a whale tale. You've already shared so many amazing stuff with us today, and you've also shared amazing stories with us in the past, which I'll link to in the show notes. But if you have another whale tale you'd like to share with us that was memorable at any point on your many journeys.
I'll do a recent one and it won't be too long. This past summer, so I had two wonderful research assistants with me this past summer, and one of them, it was her last evening. Going to fly back. She actually started vet school, so she not everybody who comes out with me is necessarily going right into cetacean biology, but it's good experience because, of course, with veterinary work, you're working with large animals, and so it's her last evening. It's a beautiful evening on the water. We're not seeing any whales right off the base. We go to Cape St. Lawrence, which is the most northwestern point of Cape Breton Island, and around the corner, up along the highlands, there's beautiful groups of pilot whales just kind of socializing and lazing around in the water, and we're watching them, and of course you turn the boat off and you just drift along, and they're drifting to you and from you, and you're kind of like in a pilot whale soup, which is amazing. It's the best way to watch them because you're not creating noise, you're just stopped, you're just letting the whales do what they want, and then all of a sudden we had these juveniles and subadults come up to the edge of the boat. And one by one, there was 3 of them that were close. They turned over onto their backs and started flipper slapping all together. All 3 of them in tandem. One started, the others you just get them on their backs and they're like, ha, slap, slap, slap. And this went on for like 7 minutes that you had this trio of flip slapping pilot whales. And I've seen singles and doubles, but this was the first time I'd seen 3 of them almost touching each other on their backs, flipper slapping. And of course, with flipper slapping, you might say, okay, well, what's the function of flipper slapping? It seems like it's just
amazing.
So it's a lot of pilot whales do it. It's one of my favorite behaviors. They roll on their back. They take those long, noodly, wobbly, long fin pectoral fins, and they just slap the water. Sometimes with one fin, sometimes with both fins at the same time. And it's like a moment where it exudes pure joy. Why exactly we do it, we don't know. It's often when they're socializing. It's often when they're goofing around. So, it's hard to prove something's for fun, but that's kind of what it feels like might be occurring. But it's certainly one of I call them the jesters of the sea sometimes. They're very charismatic. They're very gregarious, and they like to goof around. And that's pilot whales for you. So that was like one of my favorite memories from the summer, was just this trio of flip slapping pilot whales on their backs right near the boat. Just really everyone was just hanging out. And so moments like that, of course, we do some of our monitoring work off of whale watching vessels. We get to experience, we get to share the experience often for the first time people are seeing cetaceans, but also make our research accessible. Yeah. So we're an active publishing group. We share what we learn so that it's a moment where people can both see the whales, learn to appreciate them, but also learn about conservation and why it's important. So my teaching doesn't end in university. My teaching then goes out into the field. And so I really enjoy that ability to interact with the public. And I think too, when your projects are funded sometimes by taxpayers' money or sometimes by other kind of public funds, it is really good to have a way in which you can interact with the public beyond just the university.
Yeah, absolutely. And teach them that they're not black belugas.
Yeah.
Step 1. These are not belugas.
No.
Yeah.
I guess before we wrap up, we like to ask all of our guests to try to leave our listeners with some sort of call to action or something that they can do to look after the oceans and the whales and other cetaceans.
Absolutely. There's so many things. One of the things that I like to highlight is, of course, nowadays where whale watching is becoming increasingly more popular. And whale watching can be done in a really good way and a really bad way. And so one way in which people can help with conservation of cetaceans is to pick responsible operators. I know there's a lot of debate out there. So I always hear like, oh, if the whales don't move, they could go away. Like if the whales don't move, they must not be disturbed. But I want to share a little scenario with you guys and then give you a few facts that support it. So if you're sitting in a room, just like I am right now, and there's a wasp in the window in the far corner, most of us, if you were monitoring our cortisol and heart rate, it would go up. But we're probably not going to leave that desk, right? We're not going to change because the stress it's there, but it's not enough to cause this outward behavioral change. Now, if that wasp comes towards us, then we might jump out of our seat and do something obvious. So the message here is that just because whales don't appear to be obviously reacting to you watching them, doesn't mean that there's not a potential for disturbance there. And that's why it's really important that scientists do studies and figure out what's going on. So one thing we know, there was an amazing study done off the Canary Islands with short-fin pilot whales, and they had a boat that was hybrid, so they could turn it on electric or they could have it on gas. And so they approached the whales. Their distance limit is 60 meters, so it's a little bit closer than in Canada, what's legal. And they found that when they approached the 60 meters with the gas engine on, the petrol engine on, that they saw about an 81% decrease in the nursing of calves and about a 29% decrease in the resting of those adult females that were with them compared to normal, which is very significant, but something that you wouldn't necessarily notice if you weren't studying these pilot whales. When they turned it onto electric, which is quieter, it's not nothing, but it's quieter, they had no change from baseline. So one thing that we can be supporting is a change in, okay, so, where there's obviously a conservation value to seeing something and caring about something, how can we do things to mitigate that disturbance that we have, that trade-off? Because anything we do, even as scientists, there's some disturbance in our studies. Like we have to acknowledge that. We're not totally, but we have a responsibility, I think, to minimize it. So how can we do that? One way is the most disturbing thing is the boat noise. So how can we come up with quieter engines? How can we do this in a way that, we still understand the value of education and the value of seeing as caring, but also are able to support kind of a bit of a shift towards something that will lead to quieter oceans that will be less disruptive.
Well said.
That's a great one, because not something that people think about. Because, there's the normal whale watching guidelines, but and that, of course, is for everybody, recreational boats as well. So,
Yeah, and I often hear the excuse, oh, well, they'll move if they're disturbed. And I'm like, well, by that point, you've really crossed the disturbance level. So it's much more subtle than that. It's you don't want to prevent that nursing from happening. Exactly. You don't want to prevent that resting from happening. You want to find a way. And we know there are ways. So the science shows that there are ways. And so it's not something that can happen overnight, but to encourage the move towards kind of these better practices.
Yeah, that makes me think of my sister's cat and the amount of stuff he puts up with from my niece and nephew without moving. But you can tell that he is disturbed. There's subtle signs. He doesn't move because he wants to win, which he will not. But there's disturbance for sure. So that's a great one. Thank you. Do you have anything else? Anything we didn't ask that you really need to share with us right now that's super nerdy and fun?
Honestly, I think I've covered a lot of it. And if you ask me where I might end up on this, another 10-minute story. So
this is where we end up with super long episodes into the night. Yeah. So that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. What are you doing? Indeed. You're teaching right now. Are you going back to Nova Scotia this summer?
The plan is to go back for 4 or 5 weeks of the summer. So I'm typically there for August and then maybe the last week of July. And then, of course, I have to come back to get ready for the fall. So the pilot whales are still around in September. The weather gets a little bit worse. But I have this lovely research observer. She's actually the whale watching captain's daughter and the first mate on the boat that she's now taken photos for, I think it's 8 years.
Nice.
And honestly, almost does a better job than me. And she collects those photos as well as basic behavioral group composition data. So even when I'm away, the data doesn't stop rolling, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Also. Excellent. And you get to not be in Nova Scotia in the winter, which is the dream.
Yeah. Well, I don't mind the snow. What I minded was like the 4 months of brown, soggy wetness and then straight summer. Yeah. That was hard because in BC we have lovely springs. So I did miss it.
Yeah, it's very true.
Oh, amazing.
Okay. This was so great. Thank you
so lovely.
So much.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so lovely to meet you.
Well, that about wraps us up. And we, as always, would really love to hear your thoughts on this episode or any episode. So please visit our website, whale-tales.org, and find links to all of our social media handles so that you can drop us a line.
You can also head to our website to subscribe to the podcast, learn about supporting us and becoming a patron. And while you're there, you can check out over 1,600 whale, dolphin, and porpoise stories.
That's whale-tales.org. Tales like the stories, not tales like the animals.
You can find Elizabeth at Offshore Orca on Instagram. The Cape Breton Pilot Whale Project is on Facebook, and pilotwhalesofcanada.com is their website.
And if you've seen a cetacean, we would love to add your story to our library. You can click the share link on our site, contact us on social media at whaletales_org, or you can email us a voice memo and tell us all about your incredible cetacean encounter.
Finally, we want to acknowledge that we recorded today's episode on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples and the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Shianu, and Sauk nations. Elizabeth joined us from the Semiahmoo Nation as she lives within the Tataloo, Little Campbell River watershed where they call home.
Thank you all so much for listening, and we hope you have a really great day.